Do you love books but don't have time to read them? Do you wish you could listen to your favorite stories while driving, working out, or doing chores? If so, you need Audible, the world's largest library of audiobooks and podcasts. With Audible, you can enjoy unlimited access to thousands of titles across genres and categories from bestsellers to classics, thrillers, romance, fiction, and nonfiction. You can also discover new and exclusive content from Audible Originals, featuring original stories and performances by celebrities and authors. Plus, you can download your audiobooks and podcasts offline for listening anywhere, anytime, on any device. And with Audible Plus, you can get even more benefits, such as unlimited listening to select audiobooks and podcasts, free exchanges and returns, and a 30-day free trial. So what are you waiting for? Join Audible today and start your listening adventure. Visit the show notes to support the show and get your free Audible trial today. Thank you for your support.
And now, on with the show.
Gentlemen, what is the most extravagant movie you've ever seen? The one that just left it all on the screen.
So for me, this one is really, really easy. When it comes to extravagant, I mean, is there any better word to describe Mad Max Fury Road? I mean, just from the visuals and the sound and the stunts, just everything, you just go, wow. This is like maybe the purest expression of the term pure cinema. This is not anything you could get in any other art form. It is just one of the most wild rides you'll ever see. It really is just George Miller just throwing it all on the table and leaving it out there. And it's not like he was a guy who ever played holding anything back before. Like he was always throwing like 102-mile-per-hour fastballs, and then with Mad Max Fury Road, he just goes, what if I told you this whole time I could throw it 106 miles an hour? And you go, oh, okay, that's you just you were holding on to this for the 20 years you were doing nothing but children's movies. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any other. I mean, I'm sure, Mike's going to have a different answer, and I'm sure it's going to be very valid and everything, but for me, it's literally just like, it is everything. It is literally everything. Just even, I'm pretty sure there's a kitchen sink somewhere in that movie. Have no idea how he's going to even follow this up with Furiosa. I know he says he's not going to try to do Fury Road, it's going to be its own thing, but also, like, come on, bro. We know you're a psycho, and you're not going to play play softball all of a sudden. So Fury Road is the most extravagant movie I've ever seen. It's out of control.
Before I hear Mike's answer, I want to know, Tom, does the inclusion and or decision to release it in black and white enhance the movie at all for you, as someone who has not had the opportunity to see it in black and white yet?
I haven't seen it in black and white. I have no interest in seeing it in black and white. I mean, this is not a case of like, oh, Nightmare Alley got to re-release in black and white or something, where it's like, okay, that kind of like format is based on old black and white movies. Like, no. Fury Road is all about those crazy colors, being stuck in the desert, and the explosions and the crazy colors on, the bad guys and their crazy costumes and everything, and the Doof Warrior playing a bright red guitar a back of a gigantic fucking cobbled together vehicle with flames shooting out of the neck of the guitar. No, that is not a movie that benefits at all from a black and white version. That is just. But then again, it adds to the extravaganza to me, because it's just George Miller going, well, what if I did the movie a different way? And you're just like, okay, George, do whatever you want, bro. You're a madman. Just the doctor from Australia doing the craziest shit in the world. Go for it, bro. I love it.
So I had a tough time with this in a way, because I think I had an answer, but the more I kept thinking about it, a thing that kept popping up is a movie we actually talked about on the show that I think is my definition of the most extravagant movie, uh, which has not yet been topped, which is D.W. Griffith's Intolerance. For the fact that that is a movie that, even when we watched it for the show, practically a century later, that is a movie that you watch and just keep going, Jesus Christ, they did that. Like, and I think part of it is, when we're talking about extravagant movies, and I think to Tom's point about Fury Road, part of the impressive thing about Fury Road was how much of that they actually did, right? how much of that was actually practical sets and practical stunts. And that is the thing when you watch Intolerance, and part of the reason I think it gets in its first year is you do sit back and just go, right, they didn't have any tricks for this year. Like, in some senses, it was just like, and spent money in a way that Hollywood really wouldn't spend money again. By the time Intolerance comes around, Hollywood is treating spending more money on movies like how we treated the housing market in the early 2000s, where everybody was like, well, this will just keep making more and more money. And of course it didn't. And those giant elephants in Hollywood were like the cautionary tale of, we can never get this crazy again. But they did. For one movie, they got that goddamn crazy, and you do just watch it. I'm glad it doesn't happen again, because there's such, much like the original Ben-Hur, there's such disregard for human life. There's such destruction. But you do look at the finished product and go, it is insane that this much money went into something like this, and this much practical work went into something like this. It is the definition of cinematic extravagance, and its ghost has sort of lingered over Hollywood for a century afterward. And Kyle, I would recommend watching Intolerance in black and white.
Okay, good, great, good, because
Yeah,
that didn't
agree.
really feel like a good film to watch colored for some reason.
C.W. Griffith
I
would
was
not
gonna
want
say,
anything colored.
There we go.
Yep,
Tom
set
and
that
I
one up.
racing to take that one.
Yep.
Racing to take down the racist.
Yeah, I'm glad we're recording this when we did, because I get to say I immediately had an answer to this when I read the question, and it's Best Picture winner RRR. Film's incredible. I don't need to say anything more. I bought a ticket. Museum of the Moving Image. Saw it with a buddy of mine. Legit could not have been more excited about a film, at least post-pandemic, since going back to movies, like at the end of 2021. Like, man, it was just, I don't know. And it was funny because everybody I try to recommend it to, even people that are on the fence, I'll show them either one trailer or the song, and they will legit almost like it like at the exact same time, and it'll be like, how is that the same movie? I'm like, you just gotta watch it.
Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, Kyle Reid Hass and Jeremy Swanton return with their musical expertise to discuss 1958's Gigi.
Our guests today, returning to the show once again, they are theater and film creators, Kyle Reid Hass and Jeremy Swanton, also known as Hass and Swanton. Guys, welcome back. Your third time on the show in what is becoming an annual tradition. The listeners really enjoy when you're on. We always look forward to when you're on, so you're stuck doing this now. It's just a thing.
It's our favorite thing. It's our annual tradition, like you said. We look forward to it every year. So thank you for having us.
And this year you decided to do it in style. We should note the listeners don't have a camera, so they can't see what we see. But would you mind? You know what? I was going to ask you guys to describe your look right now and your vibe, but I'm not going to do that. Tom, for the listener, can you describe what we're seeing right now on camera?
They look like they just got done disappointing a gaggle of high-class whores. They are in...
Just like
they
Gigi.
are just like all of the French assholes in Gigi. They are in a hotel. They are in robes, and they have champagne flutes. And yes, they are filled with champagne. So they are living it up. Yeah. Once again, proving that they are better than us, and they know it.
A couple days ago, I had the thought, should I discuss with Kyle and Tom the appropriate term for sex worker to use in our Gigi discussion? And I thought, probably shouldn't be an issue. That's on me. That's on me.
Yes, to be honest, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So don't even try. You know what? I respect it.
At this case, if I try and stop you, it's just going to remind you that it's an option. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kyle and Jeremy, thank you guys so much for coming back on the show. We really appreciate it.
We're very happy. We love coming back and doing this. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it here in style on our staycation. So
We and it kind of, we kind of have a little segue between seasons 2 and season 3, because on season 2 you guys came on for Love Me Tonight, the Maurice Chevalier musical, and you guys are back on again for a different Maurice Chevalier musical. Of course,
That's
he's not
true.
the lead in this one, but he is very much a factor.
Yeah.
It's
MVP.
it's so interesting because I was looking at it and thinking about it. Because every time we wrap one of these up, you guys go, we'll come back and you could have us on for a non-musical if you want. But people really like when you come on for the musicals. And I took a look, and there is at least one, in some sense, musical in every year of the registry's inductees except like 3. So there's a ton of movie musicals. Now, in some cases, the definition of musicals can be stretched. One year, the musical movie that gets in is Let's All Go to the Lobby. We're kind of stretching the definition a little bit here and there. In this case, there's no stretching of the definition. This is undeniably a movie musical. In fact, this is perhaps the most movie musical ever made. Guys, I do want to ask this. I think this is really interesting, Gigi in particular, because it is inducted in the 3rd year of the registry, right?
Mhm.
So at this point, there haven't been, when you think about the movie musicals that the National Film Registry deemed worth having in, at this point, we've had Singin' in the Rain, we've had Wizard of Oz, we've had Love Me Tonight. Was there even another musical in season 2? I don't even remember if there was.
Don't ask me, bro.
That's true. It's a fool's errand. But nevertheless, consider the grand tradition of the movie musical up until Top Hat. They did do Top Hat. But consider the grand tradition of the movie musical. There are probably a lot more well-remembered musicals today, more canonical musicals today than Gigi. And I think one of the things that's interesting, this movie won a bunch of awards. It made a ton of money. It was one of the highest grossing films of its year. Its footprint is a lot lesser than other musicals to come. I mean, case in point, before we got on mic, Kyle, you were just telling me that you watched Gigi for the first time for this podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that as in tisk tisk, you should have seen it sooner, but folks have heard you on the show enough. If you hadn't gotten to it until this point,
Yeah.
what does that say about the legacy of this? Now, Jeremy, had you seen Gigi before?
No, but I was always the one recommending it. We had
He was
the
always trying to
DVD,
push it
and I
on
was
me.
like, let's watch Gigi.
And I'd be
And
like, let's
no.
watch a different
anything
movie.
else,
I've been dreading watching this movie. I think because I'm not such a big fan of Meet Me in St. Louis is another hot take.
That's
Hell yeah. Fuck that movie. Yes.
Yeah, fuck that movie.
Tom
But
doesn't remember what he said yesterday, but for some reason he remembers not liking a movie he saw 5 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
My thing with Vincent Minnelli is I love the style of the movies, but that isn't why I watch a movie. I can look at a picture for aesthetic value. I don't know.
It feels like you're looking at a moving painting.
Yeah, which I can go to a museum.
Okay.
You know, for me, I like story. I'm a big story person, and I'm not saying this movie doesn't have a story and it isn't interesting, but I don't know. That's not his priority as a storyteller, and so I just find myself not vibing. I get the diva worship of Judy Garland.
Yeah.
And thank you for contributing to Liza 50% of that. But I don't know.
Math checks out.
I'm not as big of a fan of his movies.
Well, you know what? It's fun. It's funny though because I don't like Meet Me in St. Louis either, but I've seen one or two of his non-musical movies, and they don't have this problem, because I don't disagree. Like the Bad and the Beautiful. Am I?
Bad and the
Beautiful.
yeah. Lust for Life.
His Kirk Douglas Hollywood, like, isn't Hollywood just run by shitheads movie. It's not that. It is very much like story and character and all of that. It's not like
I gotta watch.
It's a great movie, unbelievable movie. And Mike just recommended me one of his other non-musical movies that, as he described, is maybe the most Tom movie possible.
This is what's interesting about Vincente Minnelli is, like Tom notes, he wasn't just a musical director, but he is also like the definitive musical director, right?
Yeah.
The same year as Gigi, he has two other movies. He has one called The Reluctant Debutante, which is a comedy. It's like a Rex Harrison-led comedy, which, guys, I'm going to throw this to you just so you know it exists. It was the movie that got remade as What a Girl Wants with Amanda Bynes.
Hey,
I
that's Jeremy's all-time favorite movie.
I knew that was going to get that exact reaction.
I knew it was, somewhere in.
Yeah. But the other one is called Some Came Running, which also gets a bunch of awards nominations this year.
Okay.
It stars Frank Sinatra as a frustrated, rage-fueled, possibly alcoholic failed writer who was in the army, comes home having attracted the affections of loose morals gal Shirley MacLaine, and has a lot of conflicts with his older brother, who he sees as always looking down on him and who may have been the cause for all of his rage issues. And also he befriends alcoholic gambler played by Dean Martin. It's just violent and angry, and Dean Martin calls women pigs a lot. It's a wild movie.
I can see why Tom liked it. Yeah.
He hasn't seen it and he likes it.
That's the thing. He just described it to me. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm watching this movie, and I'm like, yeah, this is 100% my shit. Yeah, absolutely. Which is so it's funny that you say that about Minnelli, because it's not wrong, but also not completely correct. Yeah. Even though, like, in my brief research of this movie, he did just like go to museums and study a specific artist or art style to come up with the visuals of the movie, which is what he did with his musicals. He always studied a specific artist or an art style to come up with everything. So, when it comes to his musicals, you're not wrong at all. And I think that's probably why I don't like Meet Me in St. Louis at all.
Yeah.
But I do kind of like this because it's about whores.
It is a fascinating thing because we were talking about the legacy it has or doesn't have. Like, it won all these Oscars. It's on these lists, but at the same trust me, I was getting there, my friend. I was getting there. That's the thing. Like, so many of these if a movie musical was a hit, it gets a Broadway adaptation, right?
Yeah.
So you think about, like, number one, it took so goddamn long for Gigi to come to the stage. And right, it was that production with Vanessa Hudgens playing the lead role.
Yeah. Wow, that long?
Yeah. Vanessa Hudgens, and we're talking like trying to have the career resurgence Vanessa Hudgens.
Because she's so French.
But I mean, listen, the singing voice of Leslie Caron wasn't French in this movie, so it's fine. They dubbed the shit out of her. But so the Vanessa Hudgens production, and it's not like I don't remember it being a hit. The Vanessa Hudgens,
No,
I didn't see it, and believe me, I would have. So
no, we have the exact target demographic for that production was our 70-year-old like adopted gay grandfather Stanley Steinberg, who we lived near when we lived in New York, and he was a big Vincent Minnelli fan. And so he was really excited. He was like, this Vanessa Hudgens. I just remember hearing that name and thinking that's a great name for a marquee. And then I saw the production. She did not have the charisma. And so I don't think it went over well with it.
It was, I just double checked. It was on Broadway in 1973.
But was it the musical or the play?
The musical.
Was the musical, okay.
It was the musical.
Because there was the play starring Audrey Hepburn.
It was
the play,
a flop. It was a huge
Yeah.
flop back then too. So it's really funny that people respond really well to it as a movie, or they did back then, and has kind of simmered now, I'd say. But
Yeah, some people respond to it well. as a
some
movie.
people don't do. And
I don't hate it. I'm being too hard on it. I enjoyed it. I really love Camelot and I really love My Fair Lady, so I had higher expectations.
Well, yeah, it felt like the stuff that they didn't have in those movies or the musicals, kind of in a way, like.
I zoned out. I missed the first half of what you were saying. Sorry.
Is this episode going to end in divorce?
Nah.
This seems.
No, this is we got married. This is the hotel where we got married. So I don't think that's going to happen.
Just the fact that Jeremy offers a little bit of pushback and the response is, I zoned out.
Oh, no, that's my mental illness. That's not him. It has nothing to do with him. Can you repeat what you said?
Do you want me to?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, remember what I said? I said I felt like it was kind of a recycled, their tricks. They have the opening number that's kind of like a talk singing.
Oh yeah, they're talk singing and male songs. That
Yeah.
Opening numbers. It's just like the one guy kind of talk singing and he's frustrated about something or excited about something.
There was a moment I turned to you and I was like, I've grown accustomed to your face from
Yeah.
Lady.
It was
another moment.
all the songs were ripoffs of their other songs.
Yeah, I loved you once in silence.
I don't understand the Parisians is the same thing as like Just You Wait.
Why can't the English learn to speak too?
Right.
Well, why? Yeah, that too. Yeah, but why can't the English and the opening number about being a predator in the park are the same song?
But why can't they give Gigi an I Want song? That's the real question.
Yeah, we know what she doesn't get, but we don't know who she is or what she wants or who this girl is until never.
Here's the thing. This is just a recycled version of My Fair Lady. Was not a bug. It was the design. It was very much Arthur Freed pulling some shady shit. So we'll get into that. Before we get further into that, let's talk about what the National Film Registry had to say. So here is what the Library of Congress had to say about Gigi. Produced by Arthur Freed and directed by Vincente Minnelli, Gigi is a lush Technicolor musical from MGM that tells the story of a friendship between a playboy, Louis Jourdain, and a young girl, Leslie Caron, that turns to love. Gigi is based on a 1944 novella by Colette and received a treatment on Broadway in 1951. But it was Freed who envisioned the story as a film musical and ultimately fought to get it made. Frenchwoman Leslie Caron was cast in the title role, and Maurice Chevalier was cast as Honoré Lechelle, a role that was expanded in the film version and which helped revitalize Chevalier's career. Gigi won numerous industry awards, including a total of 9 Academy Awards, a record at the time, and is often considered to be one of MGM's best musicals. I should note, before we get into more Oscar talk, I should just note, it did hold the record for 9 Oscars until literally the next year when Ben-Hur won 11. So,
okay.
Real small window there.
It became like Christian propaganda at the end, but like the first 3 quarters
at the end.
I really like. Yeah, no. So have you seen Ben-Hur?
It's Mike.
Motherfucker, have I seen Ben-Hur?
Yeah. So okay. Oh, I get what you're saying. At the end.
I have a DVD copy of Cimarron, but I haven't watched Ben-Hur. Come on, man. What are we doing here?
Okay. Well. Okay. Yeah. Fair. But no. It's
Tom, have you seen Night of the Living Dead? What are we doing here, guys? Come on.
I you got me. No, what?
Settle down, miss.
Gigi, you silly child.
Oh yeah, silly French girl. I like how they completely left out that she's a hoe.
Yeah. So this is the thing that's fascinating, right? Well, especially because it's also not. I should know, because they mentioned the Colette novella. I actually read the original Colette novella, which is a fascinating read because the Chevalier character barely exists in it. It's all pretty much told in the setting of Gigi's home. Her mom is more of a character. There's so many things to that. But the thing that is interesting is when you look at the original novella, Kyle, you were tripping out there for a minute, man. That was wild to see.
Oh no, we have a lovely river view. That's all.
Okay, because it looked like, do you remember when the revival of Hair won the Tony and there was that one dude on stage just going bug-eyed the whole time tripping?
Yeah.
That's how it looked from here. You were just that guy who dropped acid before the Tonys.
Uh-oh.
Does anybody else remember him? Is it just me? Do I only
No, I
have that?
remember. Of course.
I think one of my deepest, darkest fears is looking like him, and not knowing it. So
Well,
I
I mean,
have like shame chills right
if the
now.
audiences could see you now, I mean, you've
Yeah,
got the beard
they'd
going,
see I'm
you
in this
know?
gorgeous robe. They wouldn't see the lovely river view, but I can, and that's probably why I look like a flower child on stage at Tony.
I just got to ask, Kyle, why did you do that to Sharon Tate?
Oh, what did I call her again? I call her again.
You
remember?
saying you look like Charles Manson.
Oh, he's saying no. I couldn't remember her name last time. I called her something else.
Kyle, that is enough champagne for you.
I misstepped
We gotta,
behind her
Kyle, we're
tonight.
cutting you off tonight. Oh my god. We just got so off the rails already. I love it. So I was saying the original novel, the Gigi novella. One thing to bear in mind: the Gigi novella is not that similar to Colette's other work. Colette, as a novelist and a writer, was writing about, the kind of sex scandals of her day and like her affair with younger men and this and that, and it was, very French and very scandalous in America and all of that. She also was fascinating because she was one of the earliest writers to start writing for film. But it's interesting to look at Gigi from the perspective of when the novella was written, because some of her biographers will just say, well, it was just her trying to write it's much lighter than her other work, a light, funny novella during the German occupation. But when you remember that it's written during the German occupation, as much as we can sit back now with this movie and go like, oh, it's so weird. It's about her being trained to be a sex worker, and then she decides to just get married. When you remember that it's written during the German occupation of France, the story of a young girl and the people above her trying to stamp down her independence and make her act a certain way and make her literally prostitute herself to people, and her decision to just be defiant and keep pushing back until she gets exactly what she wants and she gets treated the way she wants to get treated. Whether or not Colette meant that, it does make this a fascinating object of its time.
Sure. Issue. That's my issue, is that it is a really interesting and compelling premise. And I'm sure she did probably mean that, because like that, to me, that is what would make this a story worth telling. And a lot of that gets coded out of the movie or like skated over. And that was actually kind of my problem with it. I was like, there's so much here that is not really happening on screen.
But I think what's interesting with Gigi is, I mean, number one, the Motion Picture Code did not want this movie to happen.
I'm sure.
At all. Arthur Freed had to fight very hard, had to change a lot of things around. And while it's easier for us now to kind of sit back and see it as extremely tame, this was bold as hell for its day. And this is also a time where that's happening. I mean, again, Some Came Running, which we were just talking about, touches on a lot of that stuff. There's movies that time. This is the same year as Vertigo. So this is when the culture is starting to get more daring. Auntie Mame is this year. The Defiant Ones is this year. So film is starting to move in a direction where,
And
I mean,
kind of helped do that, right? I mean, because of the shit he had to do, he basically broke the Hays Code. But
yeah,
that's shit I was reading, is that even as tame as it feels today, like all of that stuff, like even subtly and painted over and everything, was so like, it basically said to all the other filmmakers and the producers of like, well, if they can get away with telling this fucking story, what are we even doing here? Like, what's even the point?
Well,
and
because one of the things that this film does well, and I think presages the next era of cinema, I mean, we always look at 1967 as the year that that shook up Hollywood, because it's Bonnie and Clyde, it's The Graduate, it's In the Heat of the Night, it's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, right?
Yeah.
Those movies that are all directly about what they're about. Like, nobody walks out of In the Heat of the Night and is mistaken about what the themes of that movie are.
Mm-hmm.
But 58 is similar in that way, in that 58 and the movies that come out in 58 and around this time, you got Marty a couple years before, but 58, you're got a number of movies in there, like a Gigi, like a Vertigo, like a Defiant Ones, that essentially are skirting the Hays Code by kind of taking the approach of, all right, we're going to make movies where we don't need to be protecting adults from this stuff, right? Like a
Yeah.
kid, a little kid could watch Gigi or Vertigo or anything like that and not turn to their parents and be like, Mommy, what does this word mean? Sure, they could do that. But what Gigi does in these movies of 58 do that is so interesting is that they basically go like, it's stupid that we have a code that tells us that we can't say things to grown-ups, right? So it
Sure.
starts to do a lot more that like, look, if you've already learned what the birds and the bees are, you can fill in the blanks we're leaving here and you can get what we're doing. And much like 67, where in 67, In the Heat of the Night wins, there's all these controversial films, and the next year the Oscars give it to Oliver, a G-rated movie. Similarly, I think it is interesting that in 1958, slight spoilers for our game later, but it's obvious, Gigi wins Best Picture. This lavish musical, sure, but a musical about a courtesan in training and all of this. And what wins Best Picture next year? Ben-Hur, the ultra-religious movie.
Right.
So you see it there, too, where it's like, we're moving somewhere, and then we kind of move back.
We swing back and forth.
But, the other thing with Gigi that's worth noting, before we get into the film itself, and just talking about its place that I think is really interesting, too, I think you can watch Gigi and see it as the last gasps of the classic MGM musical. It is the last
Yes,
great
for
MGM
sure.
musical, and it's the last musical that looks like this and feels like this.
Yeah.
And it's funny, Kyle, you evoked Camelot in reference to the musical, but for me, I consider, and I had this in my notes, that I consider Gigi a Camelot movie. In terms of when I talk about a Camelot movie, it's in reference to the last song of Camelot.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm.
Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot. That sadness of like, this is the last shining moment. Gigi is fascinating because it's both depicting the Belle Epoque, which is like the last period of happiness in France before World War I.
Mm.
And even then, they did not necessarily realize that they were also making a Belle Epoque of the MGM musical. That like this was
Yeah.
about to die. Even at the Oscars that year, Bob Hope's monologue is all about, I mean, I don't know how much longer we're going to be doing these movies because everybody's watching television now. So, there's that feeling in the air. But all that
Wow.
being said, while you can view Gigi as an ending, I do think it's interesting if there's musicals that win prior to this at the Oscars or even get nominated or anything like that, or just lavish MGM things, there's nothing controversial about An American in Paris, right?
No.
There's nothing, it's not a musical per se, but like it has the same energy. If it's a musical or if it's colorful and light, if it's Around the World in 80 Days or something like that, like it's fun, it's light, there's nothing offensive. It has to be a gritty, realist drama to have some controversial topics like On the Waterfront or Marty. So now let's take a look. Gigi wins in 58. The next musical to win after Gigi is West Side Story. The next musical to win after that, yes, okay, My Fair Lady. But then after that, The Sound of Music, right? So
Yeah.
you've gone from movie musicals that are supposed to distract us from all the bad things to a movie musical about gang war and a movie musical about Nazis. Right?
But I would also say, yeah,
It's
that
my
My
kind
Fair
of
Lady.
movies, man.
I mean, I get that My Fair Lady isn't, I guess, as much of an issue movie, but I think it fits right in there because of what Pygmalion is getting at and what My Fair Lady is also getting at, because they don't skirt around it at all. I think that's part of why I was frustrated with Gigi, is because they go there with My Fair Lady with the themes of like classism and just and devaluing human life and what it means to find yourself and find your independence when you come up from a place like Eliza has. So to me it fits right in there because that's still, I think it's implied that in taking at the time musical the musical theater as an art form is still fresh. For us now, we look back and we watch these movies like Sound of Music or My Fair Lady, and it feels kind of old fashioned. And it's funny because when you talk about something like My Fair Lady, there's an element of, at the time, there's an element of it that's old fashioned, but there's also an element of it that's fresh for them then. But now for us, it's just all kind of blends into the same like gray of old fashioned and not fresh. But when you take an art form like musical theater and you take a play like Pygmalion, at the time, you're taking something that's old and you're making it what's new. And so you're saying it applies to us now. There's still something to be gained from looking at this story now. And so I think that there is something kind of courageous in a way about My Fair Lady, and that they're saying we still do this. Eliza and Henry Higgins are still a part of our society and still a problem.
Going back to what Mike was saying about context of this particular movie, I think that that's what's so beautiful about it too, making this movie at this time.
Yeah, totally.
You know,
totally. I wasn't. Yeah, I was agreeing with you while you're saying that I like I said earlier, I was maybe came into this a little too hard on Gigi, but that's just the mood I'm in right now. I'm like, oh,
No,
fuck it.
I think part of my downer on My Fair Lady now, in relation to Gigi, because I think you have to watch it in relation to Gigi, is that watching the My Fair Lady movie and the energy that it has, this may sound dumb, but it's a little like watching the John Carter of Mars movie or the Ghost in the Shell live action movie with Scarlett Johansson, where you feel the energy of, you sons of bitches, this was our thing, and you got to doing the movie version before us, right? Where like John Carter of Mars, by the time you watch John Carter of Mars, you're like, I mean, I know this technically came first in a book, but I've seen Star Wars do this. Like, I've seen these things done. Or Ghost in the Shell. It's like, I've seen The Matrix, which is we should get into, because here's where Tom's going to be happy.
I haven't seen My Fair Lady, so I'm not going to be talking about it from the context of the movie itself, but I'm from the context of its place in history. I feel like it's a movie we weirdly have to, no matter what, appreciate, because it is the movie that got all of these fucking producers and everything to go, oh, I know, let's just keep doing this and doing this and doing this and going bigger and bigger and bigger. And like, we'll do it again. We'll make Dr. Dolittle. And the entire fucking industry changed because all at once, everyone was like, we're not doing this anymore. Fuck this. All of this is bad. We need to do something more because audiences hate this shit. So,
well, Dr. Dolittle is kind of the bookend to Gigi in a way, insofar as, and we'll get into this more in a bit, but like,
well, that's the funny thing of you saying that Gigi was like the last gasp of all this, because like the 60s was so dominated by, well, TV's here. How do we separate ourselves from TV? I know, big, lavish, colorful musicals, and they'll all be 3 hours long. And
it's different than like the classic MGM musical.
No, I'm not. I know that, but that's the producers didn't take the lessons of the old MGM musicals, because it was like they were trying to combat TV. So it's like, all right, TV, they got shorter run times, it's black and white. What do? We go epic. We go big and colorful and 3 hours long, and there's intermissions and there's all these things, and they just lose. For the most part, there's going to be movies in the 60s that work as musicals, but for the most part, they oversaturate the market with mediocre product. Are we in the same time period right now? I don't know. Don't go see Quantumania. But they basically ruined it. They took the wrong lessons, oversaturated the market with mediocre product, and kind of, luckily for us, pushed in a new era of filmmaking, even if it kind of left musicals in the dust for a while.
Well, but it should be noted, that part of that is because the movie musical was already on its last legs before Gigi came out. In fact, partway through production was a nightmare, and partway through production, MGM in 1957, it was the first year MGM had lost money since the 20s. They wanted to cut the budget on this thing, especially because they were filming this shit on location in Paris. They were doing all that. The thing about Gigi is, yes, it is the last great MGM musical, but it also should have failed. Like, by all accounts, it should have failed. And they were desperately trying to make this thing work. Arthur Freed was trying to prove the validity of what he was doing. And part of its success came out of the fact, which is one of the
Is that why that opening number's in there?
What? The thank heaven because of Arthur Freed?
So he can prove the validity of what he's doing.
Yeah. He's He pulled his penis out a lot. In front of underage people. Not great, but no, it's the case of like when this movie came out, they did it. They did a road show for Gigi. They handed out programs. They made it an event. They treated going to see Gigi like an event,
That's
right?
cool.
And I think and Ben-Hur the next year does the same thing. But like
Mhm.
there were roadshow presentations of Gigi with the program and everything that were still selling out when it had a wide theatrical release.
This is
So,
super
like, you know.
now, like you were saying, Tom. This is
Yep.
super where we're at with cinema now. Like
And
like those
It
promos
is.
before the movie where the actors beg you to like keep seeing movies that we're seeing now.
It's so weird that it's still weird that we're still seeing those promos now, even though it's like we've ignored COVID. We're back in theaters. Stop thanking me for being here. Get to the movie. Enough.
It's but you know, so that's kind of and when Tom mentions Dudley, no, Dudley, right? Dr. Doolittle, right?
Dudley Do-Right. Oh my god. I want to see Dudley Do-Right deal with fucking French whores.
I mean, listen, Brendan Fraser just won an Oscar. He's got his options open to him. But with Dr. Doolittle or anything like that, like part of the reason that so many of these musicals flop after Gigi was such a hit, and I should note South Pacific was a big hit that year too. The musical wasn't successful prior to Gigi for a couple years. I think like Pal Joey comes out in 57 and bombs. But I think that part of the thing is that the lesson they tried to learn from Gigi was like, oh, people want big musicals. And it's like, no, Gigi was just a lightning in a bottle. And in part, Gigi succeeds because, and this is where we'll get into this, Gigi succeeds because it was a movie version of My Fair Lady.
Right.
Pretty much, like My Fair Lady was a huge hit on Broadway, as we'll get into more, but that was a huge hit in 56. And obviously everybody wants to make the My Fair Lady movie.
Oh, that's
right.
I hadn't even really thought of this until, but now that I'm thinking about it, this is really interesting because I was kind of wondering why. Now, again, I actually did enjoy the movie, but less because of the quality and more because of just where taste was at. Because to the point that you were making, Tom, about what you see all through the 60s with musical movies, is a lot of the musical movies after Gigi are adaptations of Broadway shows as opposed to new for the screen. And so this one, I was like, it is kind of interesting. It was such a big hit, and then the taste seems to just be adaptations of what's running on Broadway. But what you're saying is it kind of is an adaptation of what's running on Broadway.
Oh, I mean, it's My Fair Lady, huge hit in 56. The rights don't get sold to Warner Brothers till 62.
Right.
They were probably expensive as shit. So, you fellas just fill in the blank here. Who composed the music and lyrics to My Fair Lady?
Lerner and Lowe.
Right. Okay. And when Arthur Freed wanted to adapt Colette's Gigi as a movie musical, out of the blue, totally randomly, who does he call in that used to work with MGM? Who are the composers?
Huh. I think it was Lerner and Lowe.
It sounds like it was Lerner and Lowe. And you have to read between the lines sometimes when you're reading these stories behind the scenes. Nobody in the scenes or in the behind the scenes stuff wants to be blunt about it. They're always pretending. Like, oh, it was just a totally unique idea. It was a totally this and that. When it comes down to the movie, not only do they compose the songs, and at one point Arthur Freed shows up and they're like, oh, Louis Jourdan can actually kind of sing. And he was like, no, he's going to sing. Yeah, but Louis Jourdan can kind of sing. And he's like, no, it's going to be like
no, I want
like Rex Harrison in My Fair Lady. He says the word. So
wow, okay.
But then comes time to make the movie. You fellas might have noticed gorgeous costumes in this movie, right?
Yeah.
Gorgeous costumes.
Stunning.
Those costumes are designed by Cecil Beaton, whose previous work was the Broadway production My Fair Lady. Arthur Freed brought in most of the cast, most of the behind the scenes crew. Now, My Fair Lady on Broadway is starring Julie Andrews. He does not go after Julie Andrews. Instead, at one point, they wanted to get the actress who was playing Gigi on Broadway, which was Audrey Hepburn, who would, of course, go on to play Eliza Doolittle in the movie version of My Fair Lady years later. But instead, Leslie Caron was already working for MGM at the time. She had been brought over to do An American in Paris, which was Vincente Minnelli's first Best Picture winning musical. And she got an Oscar nomination for a pretty cute movie called Lily, where she hangs out with some puppets. It's a nice film. And he was like, okay, we got a French girl. Let's do Gigi. Like, I can get Colette's right. Colette's estate gives somebody the rights to Gigi. Let's just make Gigi into a musical. Now, Tom, can you tell me another time where a very successful and possibly coked up Hollywood producer couldn't get the rights to a popular musical, so decided to make his own musical instead?
You know I'm not going to be able to answer this. I don't know anything.
Robert Evans, famously in the late 1970s, couldn't get the rights to the hit Broadway musical Annie, so he decided, fuck it, I'm going to get the rights to a different comic strip and just make that a musical, which is, of course, Popeye, the 1980 Robert Altman film Popeye.
Oh, Tom and I had the same reaction. No, you know what is so amusing to me? Always, and this is a great example, the logic of producers. Like, what made Annie work? The fact that it was adapted from a comic strip, of course. Like, it's never the elements of the story or
you got it.
The style of the story and the demographic that it would appeal to. It's always just some random detail.
My favorite example of that is when Batman '89 was such a big hit. Every movie producer was not like, oh, it's superheroes that the kids want to see. No, it's 1940s serials. Let's get Dick Tracy on the screen. Let's get the Rocketeer. Let's get the Shadow. It's like, that's what the kids want. They want gritty guys with guns running around 1940s New York. It's like, guys, I think you're missing one tiny detail
What
here.
an indictment of Billy Zane's The Phantom that you didn't even remember it during that rant. But you know what? Two things with Robert Evans. By the time Robert Evans does this, he's not doing it because he foolhardily thinks that's the secret. He's doing it out of spite. He was in a bidding war and he couldn't get it, and it was not done out of like, oh, I'm sure I could do it. No, it was, you know what? Fuck you. I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it better.
Which makes sense with producers and their personalities. Just in the experience I've had is they make decisions more about fuck you and than about money, than about success.
As much as we can laugh about, the strategy of like, we'll just do a Gigi musical instead and copy what My Fair Lady did, it fucking worked, right? Like, it absolutely worked. And it is a little bit like, in the case of Gigi, it's a little more on par with, I guess, like Battlestar Galactica. And by that, I mean, Battlestar Galactica was basically just a TV network going, we can't do a Star Wars TV show, so what if we just do pretty much a Star Wars TV show? And it worked because people wanted more Star Wars, right? So Gigi kind of works in part because it's like, sure, maybe you sit back and go, oh, it's Kirkland brand My Fair Lady, but you have two factors there. One, Vincente Minnelli directs the hell out of this thing, and it is a fun and gorgeous movie to watch. And two, if you liked and you enjoyed My Fair Lady's soundtrack that you bought on LP, you had no other way of seeing My Fair Lady if you didn't live in New York City.
Right.
There was no, we're going to film Hamilton and put it on Disney Plus. But at the same time, I don't want to just spend time on the My Fair Lady comparisons, because I do think that there is a lot that gets done in this movie that is very interesting on its own. And some things that didn't strike me until like the third or fourth watch. Like, one thing I noticed that I thought you guys would dig, a lot of these, think about the movie musicals we've watched before, think about the movie musicals we know, and the rules of doing a musical or a movie musical, which is, if you're going to do a musical number, it's got to be big. It's got to be, hey, if we're film it outside, or have a giant set or anything like that. So many of these numbers and the big numbers take place in a tiny apartment. The night they invented champagne, one of the best songs in the film, is 3 people in a tiny room. And it works, and it's compelling.
Yeah.
And there's that whole I'm forgetting the name of the song. Where he's sitting in the middle of the restaurant and he like just stands up. That's his only.
Oh, she isn't thinking about me or whatever.
Yes.
Like, she's thinking about me. There was that. There was It's a Bore was very intimate, and just.
I'm glad I'm not young anymore. It's just Chevalier singing to the camera.
Yeah.
I mean that's a really smart way, which you would think somebody would have thought of before, to make it feel like you're watching a stage play, very intimate, not very as extravagant. It's kind of small scale, but still cinematic in a weird way. Like, it's a very weird balancing act Minnelli's able to pull off with this movie,
Right.
which I wouldn't have thought of if you didn't point it out, Mike. But yeah, that's very like make it feel like you're watching a fucking play.
It's also what those early Chevalier movies did. I mean, how many of those songs in
Yeah.
Love Me Tonight were just Chevalier singing to the camera? And I do think to evoke a thing that Tom says a lot when it comes to older films on this show, one of is the like, well, I would be really interested to see like what it would look like if somebody did this today with what we can do today in film. It would be interesting to see this again. It is interesting to look at Gigi and think, in a sense, Minnelli is kind of going, it would be really cool to see what would one of those Maurice Chevalier movies look like today, right? He is taking what is at the time the cutting edge technology and the ability to do jokes and stuff that they hadn't done before, and he is updating the Chevalier music, right?
Mhm.
Even, I mean, the opening number of Love Me Tonight is him walking through the streets of Paris. Now in this one, it's still showing us the little people in the town. But even so, I think Minnelli's a much more interesting visual filmmaker because it's a little thing, but thank heaven for little girls. It's easy to watch that number and just think it's a bunch of people sitting. It looks like a Belle Epoque painting. But at the same time, think about the fact that the way he frames that number, the young girls are on the left side of the screen, dancing, playing. And on the right side of the screen, on the other side of Chevalier, are older women dressed formally with their umbrellas. They're very uptight. They're very stiff. And what is the thing that's kind of the bridge between them is the lecherous, horny old Frenchman who a lot of these young girls will essentially encounter on their way to becoming the women on the right side of the screen.
Right.
It's a clever framing.
It's a really polite way of putting it.
That was Arthur Freed's character that he could
Yeah.
identify with, and sort of like that we expanded on the role of the creepy uncle.
Very polite way of saying Maurice Chevalier is about to turn out the young women of
But
France.
that's the funny part about Chevalier's character that makes that character so funny. He's an old man who used to be very lecherous in his youth and definitely still thinks he could, but probably not only mentally wouldn't, physically cannot.
Right.
Like, he's one of these guys who like thinks he could pick up a 20-year-old and is then like, it's exhausting. I'm not doing it.
Thank God I don't have to do that anymore. There's a whole song about
Thank
that.
God I'm not young anymore. My anthem at this point.
Yeah.
Hey, my anthem. My anthem. I'm old. All these young kids suck. I'm too old for this shit. That is my credo.
The minute somebody was posting on Twitter about Vanderpump Rules drama, I was just like, I'm glad I'm not young anymore. That was it. That was immediately. I was like, I'm out. I don't need to know who.
What is
I don't know.
That?
It's like a reality show, and apparently there was a cheating scandal. I neither know nor care. Right? Like,
how is it a scandal? Isn't that what these shows are about?
I don't need to know what church Joshua Bass goes to. I don't need this. I'm in my 30s.
Oh no! Oh, that would be like, oh no, John Wick shot someone in John Wick 4. Get mad. It's like you people are all morons at this point.
I think that the reason why I really struggle with the movie is that it's not really about Gigi and you don't get a lot of info about her, but I think it's because they have to be so careful, so they just make it about like his journey, but his journey like Gaston's, but it's not very interesting to me. So I think that was why
I do agree. It is funny watching the movie. You do like, even if you're enjoying it, once it ends, you kind of sit back and go, "Oh yeah, there's not a lot of her in this movie."
Yeah,
it's a lot of this guy just wandering around France complaining about everything. Yes. It's like a French episode of Seinfeld.
I would counter that. Number one, I don't think Gigi is the main character of the film, and I don't think she's meant to be.
No.
I think that what Gigi represents is a satirical disruption of the system in terms of, like, My Fair Lady is about Eliza Doolittle, right? Whereas Gigi and the fun of Gigi, even in the original novella, right? The original novella, it's not, they never do any Gigi thought. It's all third person, and it's mostly about Gigi's aunt and her mother and her grandmother all worrying about what's going to happen with Gigi. How can we get Gigi to understand that the only way that somebody of her social class can survive is becoming a kept woman? Shouldn't you want to be a kept woman? All of that. A prolonged sequence where it's like, oh, she told she told Gaston off because she doesn't want to sleep in his bed and blah blah blah. And then the ending of the novella is basically the aunt, the grandmother telling Gigi, "You screwed up. You ruined everything. You had to be so independent. You don't understand. That's not how things work here. That's not how the system works." And then Gaston knocks on the door and goes, "Madam, I'd like to speak to you about the hand of dot dot dot. Whatever."
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think that what Gigi is in this is it's more the fact that it's like there is a satirical element to this film in terms of the French society that we see in this film is rigid and conservative, but they are rigid and conservative about having affairs and having mistresses and
Right.
using
Yeah.
kept women and getting women to commit
Yeah,
suicide and all of that. And so the
like I get that, and that's all. That's like all that's good. And I don't think me and Kyle are saying that Gigi needs to be the main character per se,
Tom's probably about to say exactly what I was going to say in response.
but it does feel like it with this satire it's going for. We're missing enough of the balance of seeing the other side to really let the satire land as hard as it needs to. We don't get a lot of Gigi, and all we get of the kind of lower class of France is the little bits we see in her apartment. So it's not so much she needs to be the main character. You just wish she was more a part of the movie, and we got to see her outside of her apartment and outside of her aunt's house. Kind of like let us see the other side of France. And I don't know. And Kyle, if that's not the
No, it's
exact point you're making,
pretty
let's
much
hear it.
just that
Because
that I feel that just because someone isn't the structural protagonist or doesn't even have to have a lot of screen time. And I'm sorry, the My Fair Lady thing is gonna come back. Here it comes. With My Fair Lady, it's extremely clear what the point is of telling the story by the time the story is over. Like even if Eliza hadn't been the focus, if we'd spent more time with Henry and Colonel Pickering, which would have been also probably very boring to me. But even if that had happened, I still would have overall liked that story had I gotten that moment with Eliza at the end. But I feel like I don't. Maybe I have to rewatch it a few more times, but I shouldn't really have to because of just the kind of viewer I am. I don't. I'm very invested when I'm watching a movie, and I don't know, it didn't really satisfy me, because they were dancing around what the subject matter
Well, I
was
mean,
so
you
much.
midway through the movie paused it and you were like, wait,
Let me
is she
Google it and
trying
make
to
sure
get
she's
married or
supposed to
be
be
a
a courtesan or
prostitute?
trying
Right.
to marry him at this point.
Which
Because that scene where they don't say the issue, like the two like ladies go back and forth, and it's like, do you think she? Well, if she, but what? But then, so we should Gigi. Then they're suddenly like talking to her, and I'm like, oh, maybe like that was a stakes raise moment, and now like they're trying to get her to marry him so that they can like move up and like they're like standing in society, or maybe they're just gonna go back to whore training. But then why did they get all excited about this? That was already what they're training her to do. So like I was really confused at that point and had to Google it.
and I say this as somebody who did not care for Gigi the first time I saw it, and I've definitely come around. And part of it is time. I do
Yeah.
think one interesting difference between these films, between these stories of Gigi and My Fair Lady, for as much as we're saying that Gigi is trying to do My Fair Lady, what emerged is that while the original Gigi is also a story of class, like My Fair Lady, and the first film adaptation of Gigi, a French film that's a straightforward film, no music, is also a story of class, like My Fair Lady. What's interesting is in the time it takes to make Gigi, and maybe that's because Lerner and Lowe didn't want to just do a musical about class, or maybe it's because Arthur Freed was feeling emotional at the end of an era. To me, part of that is Gigi is not actually a story of class anymore. The movie musical. Instead, to me, when I watch Gigi now, it's about time, and it's about aging, and it's about
Yeah.
the bumps along
Yeah.
the way. I mean, part of that is how much more emphasis they put on the Chevalier character. I mean, my
And Hermione
actual
Gringold's character.
yeah, I mean, and the other thing is like I think we have to put ourselves back in this time period, not because the values are dated or anything like that, but because when you look at what this movie is about, it is about a phenomenon that we right now in 2023 are in the opposite of.
Yeah.
Like right now, any discussion of the romantic life of anyone outside your specific age bracket gets you yelled at on Twitter. I mean, how many times have we seen the discourse of like, it's just, why are people watching Euphoria who are like in their 40s? Like, why do you want to know what, like this kind of thing? But the attitude of
I
Gigi
don't
and
go on Twitter.
it's people are
Good
like,
for you.
yeah, good.
I'm not even kidding. Good for you.
Call. Good call.
Don't do it. 0 out of 10 would not recommend.
But it does seem like, and listen, maybe that's partly because we're in a conversation about, age, but I do think like part of what makes Gigi work, and with that opening number too, the commentary on the DVD points it out. They're like, in a modern day setting with a different singer, Thank Heaven for Little Girls could be really creepy. But part of what makes it work is that when you hear Chevalier sing it and the way the movie frames it, the line, thank heaven for little girls because little girls get bigger every day, does not mean thank heaven for little girls because one day they'll grow up and I'll get them. What it's about is about a character like a Chevalier who was a romantic his whole life and all that, watching the circle of life happen and understanding his place in it, but still being charmed by it. I mean, the number that I think sums that up and the theme of it, the struggle that Gaston has with Gigi is watching her go from the impetuous youth in her, schoolgirl outfit or blue schoolgirl outfit who yells at him playing cards to once she's dressed, as opposed to like a My Fair Lady where the idea is civilizing her and that's the class struggle. It's not about class here, it's about age. And when Leslie Caron comes in the white dress looking like an adult, and the thing that sums it up best is the best sequence in the movie to me, which Gigi is not in at all, which is I Remember It Well. Because when you watch that scene, and Minnelli could have filmed this a million and one ways. He could have filmed it in a park. You get a sunset behind them, a very fake sunset, a pointedly fake sunset, that not only gives everything a rose tinting, like viewing the past through rose-colored glasses, but also it's a sunset. These two old people are remembering their younger days in front of a sunset. It's not a subtle metaphor, right? But the other thing that I love about it is, and this is an attitude that, again, is different than what we do today, it's two older people acknowledging how badly things were fucked up in their past and how much of a cad he was and everything. And they're both smiling and chuckling, right?
Yeah.
Because it's about like, yeah, sure, life has ups and downs, and it's sad, but nobody's bitter. There's no bitterness to it. This movie is not a bitter movie, even though it's about the past time. I would argue, when you look at the way we talk about things now, it's a deeply bitter time, but this was not. This film is not doing that. And I think that that's what separates it from My Fair Lady, and what does something interesting is that as opposed to Eliza Doolittle, who she represents the lower class, but she also has to have a personality contrast that, Gigi in this film just has to represent impetuous youth. And Gaston just has to represent the refusal to fall into the trappings of old age. And Chevalier has to represent being at the end of your ride and going, what a ride it was.
It's more of a story of just like
being trapped in the past.
It's a rites of passage story, like accepting a universal truth about life rather than. But I think this is my struggle with it, is that because it, and I guess I hadn't really thought about the fact that it was basically an adaptation of My Fair Lady, because I was thinking about it from the perspective of writers, particularly musical theater writers. So I was thinking, this is just Lerner and Lowe going like, this is what we're good at, and like, so I didn't know all the details of the history of it. So thinking of it as like an adaptation basically of My Fair Lady, because that's what the public wanted, and it's like more of that, give us more of that, and then it becomes that story. I think that was more what bothered me about it, is those two concepts are kind of working against each other in the movie. Because you're absolutely right. As I'm processing what you're saying, the movie does set itself up and state its theme in that opening number to be a coming of age story. Like we're going to watch this girl grow up. And then the midpoint of the movie is Gaston's song about like, she's just a girl. Wait, no, she's not. Oh, fuck, I'm wrong. I do like her. And then at the end, he can't watch her just be his mistress because he's in love with her, and he needs a minute, and he goes out to the fountain, and he's like, and something I said to Jeremy is every character in this movie is a gay man, because like the drama with which she's like, I think I'd rather be miserable with you than like miserable without you. And then like she goes back into her room and then he leaves the house. It's like only gay men act like that. Like there's like no one has to like he doesn't stay. She doesn't have to say anything else. Like they just understand that they were doing what they were doing for the drama. But no, the way he goes out to the fountain and just needs a minute and like twirls his umbrella and then he goes back upstairs and he's like, will you marry me? It's absolutely, and then a reprise of that opening number. It's absolutely a story about struggling to embrace the circle of life rather than being afraid of it because you're afraid of your mortality. And I mean, my favorite number was also I Remember It Well.
Yeah.
And I just love Hermione Gringle. We're big fans of A Little Night Music. In our home, we have a poster of with her name, like the billing. And so which is also about that. And it's funny, I thought when we heard I Remember It Well and the Thank God, what's the song called? The like Thank God
I'm glad I'm not young anymore.
Glad I'm not young anymore. Exactly. See, I got it right. No, that reminded me of A Little Night Music because A Little Night Music is very similar thematically actually to what they were getting at with the story. But it's still, maybe it's also like, so we bought the DVD at Half Price Books a couple years ago and we were going to watch it and we just like never have gotten around to it. But when I read something, I was reading something in the DVD case, like, because it was like a special edition. So there was a booklet or something I was reading and it said something about like, you get like it included the original film that
I had the same one. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it said something about like if to get even more of like Colette's beloved character. So I got excited about the character of Gigi going in to watch the movie from reading that, and then I was underwhelmed by the character of Gigi.
I also think though, and I'll say this, and I don't mean to like, from what I've read of other people's reviews and a lot of other reviews I've read in scholarship on this, the fact that 4 men are on here talking about Gigi does do it a bit of a disservice, insofar as apparently part of the legacy that Gigi has with a certain audience is that what Gigi represented to female viewers then and some female viewers now too is this phenomenon of you are a young girl and suddenly one day all the adults around you are basically going, hey, I know you were having fun with the dolls and all of that, and we let you splash in the mud and say whatever you wanted, but now men are attracted to you, so you got to cut all that shit out. You got to,
Right.
like, I mean, obviously Gigi, specifically in the story, is being trained to be a courtesan, but that's also a broader metaphor for just the idea of somebody telling you,
But all women
men
are
aren't going to
to
like
a
that, men aren't.
degree. Like,
Yeah.
That's, yes. So I agree with you. That's actually why I think I was frustrated by the movie because I wanted more of that and I didn't, and I felt like that was so. What I keep coming back to is just it's not their fault. It's that this is the amount they could explore that territory.
I would counter to that though, and this is a conversation that happens about movies all the time. I would counter that with just the idea of, I was reading something today about the recent Best Picture winner, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and an author complaining about, an Asian American author complaining about how he felt with that film, that while everybody was talking about being an authentic Asian American experience, he felt so many moments in that movie that he was watching where he was like, well, it felt like they were trying to make sure they didn't lose the non-Asian audience, right? And that he's hoping for an Asian American representational film that doesn't feel the need to over-explain things people don't have the experience. I wonder, looking at the reception Gigi had then, and from some letterboxers now and essayists now who are female writers, I do wonder if, when you're talking about what they could say more explicitly, I do wonder if some of that is female viewers, especially female viewers of a certain age, just bring a context to that movie and lock into the smaller ways that this does that people in our position perhaps do need something to say more specifically. It's something I see a lot when people are talking about, I mean, talk about a movie that's people are talking about now too. You know, somebody talked about Nope. Did you guys see Nope?
We didn't see it. No. Nope.
I saw critics basically saying, like, one of the things that they love is they said there are so many moments in the relationship between Keke Palmer and Daniel Kaluuya that they go, those are black sibling moments that never once have either character say anything to the non-black siblings in the audience. You know what I mean? Like that kind
Yeah,
of thing. So
I do
wonder
know what
if,
you mean. I just don't think that is what I'm getting at. I get the experience you're talking about. And as I've gotten older, I've experienced this a lot where I work in theater, and in order to be a better director, I'm pushing myself farther and farther to be more empathetic to people with different experiences. So I'll work with an actor. Like when I did Spring Awakening, I worked with obviously a female actor in the role of Venla, and she goes through kind of the opposite of what Gigi is experiencing, where her sexuality is getting suppressed and oppressed. And ever since the work we did in the rehearsal room, it's now I feel that I'm so much more, just from her sharing her experience with me, I'm so much more in tune with that kind of thing than I would have been in the past. And it did open my eyes to kind of exactly what you're talking about. Like, oh, like we talk about the whole like different people's different perspectives, and needing representation for that experience. But that was a moment where I could really feel it. I'd forget what movie it was or something, but freshly after working on that show, I was watching some movie, and I just was like, I feel like I have so much more context now just from listening to someone else's experience. And like it's absolutely a real thing. And but the reason why I feel like that isn't what I'm getting at is because I had that exact thought last night, where I thought, oh, this would be a moment, that specific actor from Spring Awakening, this reminds me of the work that we were doing and what she was talking about. Like, she would probably get a lot out of this moment of Gigi. And I even was like thinking, this is really cool, the subtext of I don't understand the Parisians. Like, it's this like psychological, like she's not ready yet to say, like, I don't understand my family, and I don't understand why they're comfortable, like accepting this as their lot in life. Yeah,
I agree with basically what Kyle's saying. I don't think it's that aspect of it, and I don't even think it's we need to be more explicit with anything. I think it really is just, I think we need a little more of her, and not a lot more of her. I think she comes off, and through no fault of the actress, she comes off more like a symbol. She is more of a metaphor for his journey. And honestly, I think she's the one going through the more interesting story. And even if you want to focus on him, that's fine. I think that's totally fine. He's got an interesting journey too, especially, as that kind of guy in that era where it's weird to love a woman and not just treat her like a whole. I do wish there was a little more of her, and not like I'm bringing some fucking deep critique here or anything, since a lot of the names there's some names shared between these two, but this is not too dissimilar, I feel like, to Beauty and the Beast. And I feel like she could have been a little more of Belle and not just a symbol. I think that's really mainly I said it before, I wish we had a little more of her to add to the class element of it, and I wish she was a little more rounded out. That's kind of really what, you feel like you're going to get a lot more of her in the beginning, since it's all about, you get her with her, she's with her mom's like, oh, I got to go to my aunt's today. Oh, and then she goes to the aunt's, and you're seeing all that. And then she kind of just like disappears for a while, it feels like. And a large chunk of the movie feels like it's all about him. I think that my biggest takeaway, my biggest critique of the movie is that it felt too long. And it's not that long of a movie, but it feels too long because you spend so much time with him. You're kind of like, okay, let's get going here. Like, we get it. This guy's we get this guy's problem. We get the world he's in. Let's go back to her. Let's see what she's dealing with beyond her family's conspiring to turn her into a prostitute. Like, but also, like, that's interesting. That's interesting. Like, let's get even if it's still her secondary, there's a little more meat on the bone, I think, is mainly the problem me and Kyle are getting at.
And it's not to discredit the points you're making either, because I actually agree. I think that there is still so much good that they're doing with the movie to challenge people. So in that way, and clearly the movie worked. I mean, if it won that many awards, and it landed with audiences, and it clearly gave them that taste of My Fair Lady, that like it sounds like a big chunk of people were looking for. To me, the reason why I want to come back to that point is this is just something that I think is a really interesting conversation, is what people understand the musical to mean, what people understand like Broadway even to mean. Because so much of the country doesn't get to see a lot of Broadway shows, it's really more ideas from film and television where people get their ideas about musical theater. And we just talked about this recently, how like Leah Michele, for example, in Funny Girl is selling because the country perceives her as Broadway, and so they're getting their Broadway fix by going to see her in this show. And yes, she was a child actor on Broadway. She was in Ragtime, and she did Spring Awakening. Ironically, the same character I was just talking about was originated by Leah Michele. She's known for TV, and she's known for playing a Broadway obsessed teenager on TV who wants to be on Broadway and stars in Funny Girl on Broadway in the TV show. And so that's been a big thing I've been thinking about lately, is like, because now that we're in TV, I'm like, oh, how can I set us up for success on Broadway by like creating a narrative about Broadway in the TV work I do, because it is so. And so when you look at Gigi is like the perfect example, and I'm glad you brought this up, Mike, because I hadn't even really thought about it, and I wouldn't have had you not said it. Like, it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. This relationship with the public that keeps Broadway running and basically keeps Broadway in business is like this unspoken dialogue between the creatives in New York and the creatives in Hollywood. And it's been like that since the Depression, when no one wanted to work on Broadway, so they all went out to Hollywood and made movies about Broadway for all through the Depression era, because it was just kind of too hard to be in New York doing the theater thing. But no, so these are really interesting points that you've brought up about that they wanted their adaptation of My Fair Lady, but then I feel like they also wanted to tell their own story about time and about coming of age in the circle of life. And it's that actually, when you're describing that, I was like, huh, now I kind of want to watch it again thinking about that. And I probably will. But I don't think that I wouldn't feel this way. I would still leave the movie feeling like I just wanted, and I'm not discrediting the fact that she probably did for a lot of women who saw this movie, probably felt empowered by the fact that she does put her foot down about it. And then I love the scene in Hermione Gringold's performance. I've never seen her do something like that, because Hermione Gringold is like a character actor through and through, and she's so known for being funny and being ridiculous. But her acting in the scene when her sister came over and is like mad that Gigi doesn't want to do this, and she's like, and I can't say I don't agree with her, and there's this sadness of like she wasted her whole life, and it was so like just subdued and defeated and beautiful. And so I'm sure that there is that element of it going on, and that couldn't be more explicit in the male dominated Hollywood that we had at the time in terms of who was making the decisions, the executive decisions. But I still feel like now, for me as an audience, it's the difference between what worked when the movie was released and what works for me now watching it is really the difference here. Because for me watching it now, this is what I do. I watch old musicals. I'm such a big fan of like Sound of Music and the My Fair Lady movie and Camelot and I was trying to think of another, like even the South Pacific movie you brought up. Like I love that movie. And so I went into this excited about Lerner and Lowe because they usually tell such interesting and compelling and thought-provoking stories that the character analysis could keep me up for like all night for days, just thinking about and talking with you about the characters. Like the character of Guinevere in Camelot is so interesting. Her psychology is so interesting, and there's so much meat there. And she's not the structural protagonist of that story and doesn't have a ton of time with the audience, but the time that she does, she's just like she's just such an interesting human. And then the same thing with, I feel that way about like every character in My Fair Lady. So I think I just went into it expecting, because it was Lerner and Lowe, that there would be that, and that, specifically that those things would be represented in music and in song. That's what excites me.
I think
And
human was the key word.
yeah,
There, they
yeah,
explore humans
as opposed to a
as
symbol, like
opposed to
Tom
a
was saying.
symbol.
Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
I think essentially that's kind of, we've basically talked all about essentially why it feels like this movie's cachet hasn't really lasted as long, because even throughout all of this discussion, we've talked about things that we did like about the movie and like the things it's exploring, but maybe it didn't do it well, or by having this clashing idea of trying to do My Fair Lady and trying to do its own thing, and that mixture made this unique thing that we like for a lot of reasons, but in other ways don't necessarily work. So I think in that regard, we kind of got down to why the critical cachet of this, compared to other musicals of the time, haven't really lasted. Maybe Spielberg should remake this. I don't know. I think I'd be in.
But it's interesting you bring that up, Tom, because I want to do two things real quick, okay? Because I'm sitting here from my box 30 feet up, and I think two things that I want to interrogate. Number one, and we'll do them in sequence. Number one, Tom, you gave this movie 4 stars on Letterboxd, 4 out of 5. I did not expect that. I don't think anybody expected that. So first, I want you to address what made it 4 stars. And I agree with you. I'm in the same boat, but I want you to talk about that. And then after that, I want to note this has been a very Kyle and Mike heavy discussion. So what's going to happen is, after Tom talks about his 4-star rating and why he gave it that, Jeremy Swanton is going to get 5 to 10 uninterrupted. Whatever you want to say, no one. That's the rule. No one will get shock collars on people if we have to. There's no one can interrupt. I don't even care if you talk about the movie. You could just say, if you want to just sing Mac the Knife, I don't give a shit.
Okay.
But first of all, Tom, you watched Gigi, a movie I don't think you had high hopes for, and you came away giving it 4 stars and had a blast with it. So,
All right, so I wouldn't say I went in having high hopes, not because of what I perceived the movie to be, because I didn't know what the movie was going to be. Like we've talked about, this doesn't have the cachet that it does now. So even through osmosis, I had no idea what it was going to be. Mainly, I was just worried that it was a Minnelli musical, and I didn't like the last one I watched. But I actually did really like this one, mainly because not mainly, but like for a few reasons. One, I thought the acting was great. I thought Louis Jourdan was great. What's Gigi's the actor Gigi's
Leslie
name?
Caron.
I thought Leslie Caron was great. I thought the disembodied voice that came out of her when she sang was fantastic. And I'll get back to him, but Maurice Chevalier, MVP of the movie. I love that this was basically, what if Pepe Le Pew had Gran Torino? But I thought the acting was great. I loved the, weird to say, but like the messy politics of it, in that it is critiquing the courtesan lifestyle, but it's not critiquing the courtesans themselves. Her aunt is never treated like she's lesser than. Her grandmother is never treated like she's lesser than. Even the other women, they're never treated like they're idiots or whatever for getting into this. It's just like, this is just the system. This is the way it is. Whatever. So I like that, and I like that we don't want Gigi to get into this lifestyle. We want Gaston to like just realize he loves her and not do this, but it never judges her for doing that. It allows her to have her own humanity in making this decision. So I like that there's that messy human quality to it. I thought the songs were really good. I thought they were really good. I wouldn't say they were the greatest songs I've ever heard in a musical, but they were really good. They kept me engaged. And honestly, it's been a long time since I've watched a movie that I desperately need to get like a 4K Blu-ray upgrade. That there is just no high def copy of this really to be found. I think even on a shit ass DVD that probably came out 25 years ago. The colors looked great. It was shot gorgeously. Minnelli directed the hell out of it. And I think having that on my gigantic fucking 4K TV with those colors and that sound coming out of it, I probably would like it even a little more. I think all the things we discussed about it would keep me from ever going above a 4, but for what it is, a musical that kind of hasn't lasted, I think it's actually pretty good, and the messiness of the world that it portrays really interested me. And also Maurice Chevalier. I mean, I said I'd get back to him. Maurice Chevalier is so good, and I do really think he get. And I'm not even trying to be like do a bit. I think he kind of, in a way, gives the movie its beating heart, because like you said, it's about time and everything, and he's kind of, he's the one looking back and saying, here's the circle of life. But I think he knows more than the rest what movie he's in. He's got this giddy wit to him, but there is still that sadness that glimpses through just a little bit, especially in his scene with the grandmother, and they're doing their song talking about their past relationship. The little bits of regret where he's like, oh, I remembered that detail. No, you got that wrong. And he's like, and you get that little bit of like, oh, he's maybe regretting that he wasted so much time chasing tail for whatever, 70 years, probably 60, 70 years. And he's just like, oh, maybe I should have done that. And, I think he was great. And so all of that kind of really surprised me. And I just, I thought it was a really fun movie.
All right, Jeremy, you got 5 to 10 minutes on the clock. Uninterrupted.
Okay, great.
Go to town.
Okay, so many thoughts are coming to mind. Minnelli is both of them, Liza and thank you for the time. Liza and her father are great idols for me. But one of the things that I think is so beautiful, you talk about this movie being about time and about legacy and stuff like that. How this was, kind of the last of the MGM era, but it also paved the way for the future of musical theater movies and musical movies. The one that specifically comes to mind is Cabaret, with all the close-ups, and we've talked about and discussed how this movie really changed the way we see how you film a musical movie. And I agree with that, or how it's looking back to the past in order to look forward. And so I think it's a beautiful fulfillment of that. Liza Minnelli wins the Oscar for Cabaret, because that movie implements a lot of the filmmaking tactics that her father has established during this movie. I think that it's just so beautiful to look at, and so and over the course of this conversation, even I've just developed a deeper appreciation of what the movie is actually getting at, and this idea of time. And I think that the different characters, all in their symbolic representation, all are getting at this larger truth of like that we need to appreciate each other. Actually, and for what not just what we represent, but for as human beings. He wants to marry her in the end. He doesn't want to have her as his mistress, and she transcends the symbol in that way too. And I think that that's what we're all kind of getting at in a way too, or what we were craving. So it's interesting that we were frustrated by what happens next for Gigi is she becomes real to her husband. And I think that that's kind of beautiful too. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was especially upon reflection, I'm one of those people that like will see a movie and like or a show, and like my first reaction is sometimes like not my how I actually feel about it. I'm notorious for this. Like I'll be walking out of the theater saying it was like the fucking worst thing in the entire world, and then the next week like jamming out to it on my iPhone or whatever. And I think that it's one of those movies that really had to sit with me, and over the course of this conversation I just have grown to love it a lot more. And I think it's really cool, even if it is a My Fair Lady ripoff, just the fact that they had the balls to do that, and to be like, I'm gonna fucking make this, and I'm gonna make it really fucking amazing. I think is awesome. And there's one other thing that I really wanted to get at. I think it's so cool how it did have this press tour with it, and that's I think that was ultimately why it was so successful. The movie film, it brought Broadway to America, to the people that weren't getting it, and we've touched on this over the course of this whole time that we've talked, but it made it this exciting venture to want to go to the theater, to want to go to the movie theater, to feel like you were in New York, and I think that when you look at the original production coming in 73, I think, is when it was first on Broadway, and then this revival with Vanessa Hudgens, I think that's part of the reason why that wasn't as successful as that the initial movie run was, because there was no excitement around it. There was no build up. There was no anticipation. There was no, oh my gosh, we're experiencing something like we've never experienced before. And so it's sad to me, as I'm looking back and just thinking about the themes of it and what it's getting at, that it's kind of lost in time in that way. And it's interesting too when you think about the revival, it happening when it happened, that time period. You always wonder, like, why now? And like, I think it was 2016 when it came to Broadway, I believe, right? Or is it 2017? One of those years. But just the fact that they chose to revive it then, and then it got overlooked, or people, none of us saw it. We all lived in New York at the time, and it's just interesting to me that, will someone now look back at Gigi and see what it was trying to do, and then in the same way that Minnelli was looking at these older films, will there be a revival of this appreciation for this classic, beautiful Hollywood musical? And how can we, as musical theater makers and musical film writers, perpetuate that? Like, we have, we're working on the series right now, and it's fun doing that. We have this number that's it pays homage to Summer Stock and Judy Garland and stuff like that. And I love looking at the past and looking at these different iconic moments in musical cinema and seeing how we can take it a step further. So that's all we can hope for.
That was, I need to say, primarily, there's two parts of that. One, I really just wanted to do that to make sure that Jeremy got airtime to talk, but the secondary benefit that was only for me, Tom, and Kyle Lampar is the fact that Jeremy and Kyle, you guys have been on the show before. Everybody knows you're very collaborative when you talk, and most times if one of the two of you makes a good point, the other of you will acknowledge that that's a good point, right? We've listened to the show enough that if one of you says something, they'll go, yeah, that's a good point. Getting to watch Kyle Hass attempt to telepathically say that's a good point for 6 straight minutes was a secondary delight. Because you would say something.
The audience couldn't see it.
They couldn't, but Jeremy, you would say something, and I would just watch Kyle kind of turn his head and nod, but you were looking at the camera, so it was just kind of.
Yeah, I couldn't even.
That was by the 3-minute mark. Kyle was like, "All right, yeah." Like,
I want to validate him so bad.
That was what was so funny. Is like it didn't look like you wanted to interrupt him. It just looked like you wanted to go yes. And
yeah.
Delightful.
Yeah.
What a time.
Thank you.
That's sweet.
Very, very good points, Jeremy. Loves all of that. And I honestly think the way to kind of get this back into people's minds and get this reception back is to, make it readily available for people.
Yeah.
Plenty of fucking movies get rediscovered if they hit HBO Max or Netflix or whatever. Get an HD transfer out, put it out on Blu-ray, get a 4K disc. They keep doing these big fucking anniversary, Paramount anniversary, Warner Brothers anniversary box sets. Let's get an MGM musicals box set, 4K remasters of all these lush, lavish musicals, and Gigi's in there because it fucking swept the goddamn Oscars, man. And I think people will be able to fucking do that.
I think the other problem Gigi faces now, especially, is the fact that Gigi is a movie that requires context
Yeah.
and like an understanding of the time it came from, and that's not a gift that movies get now. I
It's
mean,
also
Gigi
about
is
sex. And,
yeah,
we don't allow sexual things in movies anymore because I'm not even joking. We don't allow
yeah,
sexual things in movies
Right,
anymore because there's so many rules and regulations. It's almost like, not to be like a jerk or anything, but it's like when fucking we legalized gay marriage in this country, it like caused all the fucking like internet scolds to short circuit and be like, well, now what do we complain about? They're allowing gays to exist. What do we do? You can't be with someone if they're 5 years younger than you. That seems arbitrary. And it's like, okay, that's well then what? How do we have relationships now, guys?
the one thing I'll wrap it up with is the interesting thing about Gigi is it is kind of about, at the end of the day, the story of Gigi and Gaston. Yes, it's about them choosing to monogamously marry instead of carry on affairs, but it's ultimately the story of two young people going, why should I have to follow these arbitrary rules? I just want to be happy. And that is, in a way, like, that's part of the My Fair Lady thing of like, just be yourself and be happy. But it's also, it's its own thing from the Colette novella of the idea of, I don't know, guys, we think we've got it all figured out, but maybe these young folks have the right idea. So I think that that's super interesting. I also wanted to, just the last note that I'll say about the film itself, before we talk Oscars. I do find it, one thing we didn't really talk about is the fact that this movie is shot on location. Some of the
Yes.
stuff is shot in California, but like, remember, Vincente Minnelli for the Arthur Freed unit had won Oscars for An American in Paris that was all shot on the MGM backlot.
Mm.
And Freed and co. just decided, you can't do Gigi on a backlot. The scenes of them at Mitzi's, they just shut it down. They shut down the restaurant and filmed in there. They shut down a museum. They just fucking filmed in Paris. And the other interesting thing with that is that the movie, apparently, that when they were editing it, it didn't test well. They'd cut a lot of
Yeah.
stuff out and it didn't test well. They brought in a different director. Minnelli was already off shooting something else. So they brought in a different director, the director who had done Lily with Leslie Caron.
Okay.
He shoots like 11 days of reshoots. But then when they bring the footage in to recut the movie, they just added in more of Vincente Minnelli's stuff that they had cut originally, and the movie tested great. So, test audiences, folks. Who can say?
Before we get to the Oscars, just to get to the one final note about the sexuality thing and how deranged everyone is these days. Kyle, I know you're not on Twitter, but a few weeks ago, someone literally tried to get this thing going. Isn't it weird that we watch these scenes where characters are having sex? They didn't consent to us watching them have sex. And it's like,
The characters?
Yes.
Yeah. Not the actors.
Oh,
Not
God.
no. The characters never consented to the audience watching them have sex, and that is the moment where it's just like, we've collectively lost the thread. Maybe it's okay that the seas are gonna rise. We don't deserve this land anymore.
Yeah.
And the scourge that is humanity had a good run.
For our
Yeah.
own sake, because you guys are not on Twitter, Jeremy, I'm putting this in your hands to set this up. I want to set up a text message group chat between
Okay.
all of us, and we'll call this
I'm
group chat,
down. Be
and we'll
fun.
call this group chat, have you seen this shit? And what it'll just be is anytime Tom or I come across something absurd in the discourse online, we'll just post it in there and just get your reactions. So
Yeah,
you
I
don't have to
I
deal with
won't
it
do
all.
it myself. Yeah, look great. I'll
But
just be
we
great
have
at
to.
it. I
but
love
we
it.
have- Jeremy, set it up. I'm putting it in your hands. to set this up.
We'll call the text thread. Now that's what we call Twitter.
I'm excited.
With that in mind, Tom, how do you think Gigi did at the Academy Awards?
Well, it swept the Academy Awards, and it went 9 for 9. And this is what I don't know. I don't remember the exact categories, but I know it is one of the few movies to sweep the Oscars, win Best Picture, win Best Director, I believe, and not get a single thing for acting.
Yep.
It wasn't even nominated for acting, so it didn't lose categories. But it just didn't. It got all these other things, but it got Best Picture, Director, all the technical stuff. But yeah, so one of the few times, maybe the only time, that's kind of ever happened. So what? Picture, director, cinematography, score, screenplay, sound. I mean, what else am I missing? Editing, production design.
So I can tell you, and Tom, I have some Oscar info here that's going to delight you to no end, especially. I sent you the clip. I don't know if you watched it, but I sent you the clip of that Oscars that year. So at the Oscars this year, it did win Best Picture. The other nominees were Auntie Mame, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, The Defiant Ones, and Separate Tables. Little trivia for you guys when Tom mentions the acting categories. David Niven won Best Actor that year for Separate Tables. He also was one of the hosts of the show, which is the only time that an Oscar host won the night they're hosting. Now, what else did it get? It won Director, it won Adapted Screenplay, it won Scoring for a Musical Picture, it won Best Original Song for the title song of Gigi, it won Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Cinematography Color, and Best Editing. Now, as for the acting, I already mentioned David Niven, Separate Tables. Shocked that Leslie Caron does not get nominated. However, we already complained about this category because Kim Novak also doesn't get nominated for the movie Vertigo. Who does win, though, is Susan Hayward for the movie I Want to Live, a movie that most people haven't seen, but I have seen and have raved about that performance. You might remember, Tom, me telling you about that one. That's the one about the woman who becomes a drug addict and gets sent to the gas chamber.
That's awesome,
Dark
but
shit.
I don't agree with the sentiment of the title.
She doesn't want to get executed. I mean, Bob Hope, when he opens the Oscars, he has a good line where he goes, my God, the movies were so convincing. I didn't think Susan Hayward would be here. Good bit, Bob. I enjoy it. But
it's also not Leslie Caron's fault. I feel like the dubbing fucked her.
Well, the dubbing, and I think it was also like she had been nominated previously. She was nominated for Lily a couple years before. And I think this was a real technical recognition instead. It should be worth noting, as noted, it won a record-breaking 9 Academy Awards with a clean sweep, winning everything it was nominated for. That record was broken the next year by Ben-Hur with 11 Oscars. In tribute to Gigi's domination at the Oscars, MGM Switchboards answered calls the following day, calling the studio MGGM. Gigi eventually, along with The Last Emperor, held the record for film with the most Academy Award wins in every category it was nominated until it was beat by Return of the King at the 2004 Oscars for 11 for 11. But the thing I want you to know, Tom, is how the Oscars opened that year, which is you see two people holding up playbills for the Academy Awards. They drop their playbills. It is Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster doing goofy faces, starting to acknowledge that they got asked to open the show because they wanted to get them out of there quickly before launching into a full soft shoe musical performance, song and dance performance by Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster. And when I tell you the finale of this is Kirk Douglas leaping onto Burt Lancaster's shoulders like acrobats. That's how the Oscars opened, Tom.
Well, that's how we got the job for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Whale of a Tale. Whale of a Tale, don't you?
But it is, I think that's interesting. It's also worth noting when we're talking about the Oscars, I do want to acknowledge, the year before Gigi wins, it's Bridge on the River Kwai. The year after, it's Ben-Hur. And the year after Ben-Hur is The Apartment. So Gigi certainly stands out then as this glamorous thing. And the note I do want to end on with this.
That is kind of like, not to like try to shit talk Gigi or anything, but that's like, you kind of understand why it falls to the wayside when it's like in the midst of that kind of a run where you're like, oh fuck, it's like sandwiched between Bridge on the River Kwai, The Apartment, and Ben-Hur. It's like, Jesus Christ.
But it also gives the context of it's not as though Gigi was the last hurrah of the Freed unit going strong. The Freed unit MGM musical was already a dying breed. And this managed to come out and get one glorious gasp of, we can still do this, right? But the one last thing I will say on this before we wrap up, because it has come up so much, to Kyle's point and Jeremy's point about the My Fair Lady connection, one review of Gigi, when Gigi came out, said, they haven't made a movie of My Fair Lady, and now they don't need to. So the comparison was there from the beginning. Kyle,
Yeah.
Jeremy, thank you guys so much for joining us yet again on the show. We will certainly have you back next season. Now, you're going to do that thing where you go, it doesn't have to be a musical. I'm sorry. The audience likes it, so y'all are stuck with it. There's only 3 years of the National Film Registry that there's not a musical. But, I'll say this without giving too much away. There's very different styles of musical movie in season 4. So we look forward to talking about that and seeing which one y'all land on. But in the meantime, do you guys have things to plug?
Yes, we we're working on distributing our TV show that we've been working on called Act of Faith. And it is a musical mockumentary TV show about a gay man who is working in the Midwest in a conservative Christian youth theater company, and he gets outed, and all the shenanigans that ensue after that. So our first season is coming out this spring. So if you follow Act of Faith,
I would
show,
say,
right?
yeah, if you look up Act of Faith, really the best way to do it is just go to actoffaithshow.com. You'll find all the social media. That's actoffaithshow.com, in case I didn't say it when I said it.
We'll put it in the show notes
and
too. So
what is that?
we'll put it in the show notes too. So
Oh yeah, great.
people can
Yeah,
just
and
click on
that's
their-
you can if you sign up for the email list, then we'll let you know where and when to watch the show when we finally figure out where it's streaming. We pretty much know now, but we just don't want to say in case. But it'll
Is it
be out
Quibi?
really. What is it?
Is it Quibi? Because I got some news for you if you booked a Quibi deal. Might not go your way is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's gonna happen. That's a musical, but it's also a mockuseries. So it's like the pitch thing that we say. What do we even say? It's like the Office. It's like the Office and Smash or the Office and Glee. But really, it's like if like we were more influenced by Christopher Guest, I think, but we know
Yeah, meets
people
Waiting for
think of
Guffman.
Parks and Rec or The Office when they see that style. Now.
Favorite Christopher Guest? What's your favorite Christopher Guest movie?
We just watched
The
Mighty
Mighty
Wind.
Wind.
We love that.
So did I.
I love that one, and I love Best in Show is my favorite.
Best in Show?
I love Waiting for Guffman, but I think Best in Show is my favorite just because of like it's me like in a movie, like kind of
Right.
like to a degree.
You're every character.
I'm every character in
Yeah.
that movie, so I think it's fun.
All right, so I love those movies and all that, but the funniest visual joke in any of those movies is in A Mighty Wind when they just cut to Fred Willard and he looks like that
Yep.
with the
Yeah.
dyed hair and that crazy shirt, and then and then it gets funnier because he starts talking. Hey, what happened? And you just start. Oh my god, this guy is. He was the magic sauce, honestly, that made Christopher Guest movie. Because I watched Waiting for Guffman for the first time yesterday, and
probably my favorite.
It's good. But the moment you hear him for the first time on the phone as the travel agent going, Montezuma's Revenge is just good old-fashioned American diarrhea. So what if you lose a few pounds? I'm like, this guy. I like this guy. And it kind of makes me sad he's dead. I mean, yeah, I'm sad he's dead, but like...
It kind of makes me...
All right. The fact that they're doing This Is Spinal Tap 2 when he's not alive. They're doing a sequel to Spinal Tap, which means Christopher Guest is probably going to have a lot more control than he did in the first one. So his crew's going to show up. And knowing that Fred Willard is not going to be in there, just doing that crazy old man thing that he did is so sad. Because I need Fred Willard to have to interact with old Spinal Tap.
Now, to bring it on back to your plug, just before we send off to the next segment, bring it on back to your plug. Act of Faith show. Now, you said this is a musical. You said this is about the Midwest, and you said this deals with a religious community. When I hear those words, I only think of one thing. When is Tom getting a cameo? He seems to
Oh,
fit the bill for all of those criteria. So when are
Yeah.
you getting him on season 2?
Well, yeah,
We
we're
love
we're,
that.
we're having a meeting next week about writing season 2,
Okay.
so we'll make
So-
sure we write Tom a character.
Please know, and this is
you get to reprise your role, your high school Oklahoma, or you didn't do Oklahoma.
I did not do
You-
Oklahoma.
No,
Thank you.
that was a big scandal.
That is insane that you remember that.
Of course, I remember that.
Good
Yes.
Lord. I will let you know, cast Tom in a musical, and this is a true fact, a true piece of trivia I'm giving our listeners about Tom and our years of knowing each other. If you need Tom to sing something, it may not be on key unless it is the song Dream Warriors by the band Dokken from Nightmare on Elm Street 3, which is the one time that consistently, no matter when Tom sings it, hits every note perfectly, despite being all falsetto. Any other
I
time,
don't
there might
get
be a
it.
stray note. But Dream Warriors, every time, perfectly on pitch.
He's never seen me do Dragula at karaoke at a heavy metal bar, so if you need a guy to be a bouncer at a bar, I've just made myself look even more psychotic since look at me. I got fucking hand tattoos.
No,
now.
I know. It's worth it.
I've gotten even more psychotic since the last time you recorded.
I've
Okay,
been
great.
admiring the hand ink the whole time. It just wasn't. Again, that's a whole other podcast. Tattoos.
I know.
You know?
I spent
I
like
didn't wanna-
so
didn't
much
wanna-
money last year.
Well, they look great. They look
Thank
really
you.
great.
Thank you.
Jeremy, Kyle, thank you guys so much for joining us. We will see you next season. And everybody else, stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and me, who can submit their nominations for the registry in the form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of every episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration on behalf of You're Missing Out. The only criteria? It must be an American film that's at least 10 years old. Here are today's picks.
Obviously, there's a lot of directions to go when talking about Gigi, but one of the things that we kept coming back to was the idea of what they could or couldn't say in this film and the truly bold act and how difficult it must have been to make a romantic comedy about a sex worker in 1958 when you couldn't talk about it and you couldn't do all that. It was a bold thing to do in 1958, and we kind of allude to what you would do now or what you would do in modern times. You might think it's not so bold an act to do that decades later. But I will say it is still an impossible task and absolutely should fail endeavor for a romantic comedy to be made about the relationship between a sex worker and a client. A sweet romantic comedy to be made about that in the year 1990 by the Walt Disney Company. That's right. In the late 80s, some maniac at Disney had the idea, what if Gary Marshall makes a romantic comedy about a Hollywood sex worker and a wealthy businessman? Well, they cast Richard Gere, they cast Julia Roberts. It becomes the 4th highest grossing film worldwide. It was a mega hit. It endures to this day. And it's still so ubiquitous that all I need to do is say Richard Gere and Julia Roberts, and nobody listening to this is thinking I'm talking about Runaway Bride. Pretty Woman it was a massive hit for its day. The now kind of iconic sequence of him allegedly improvised, him snapping the jewelry case in front of her on her hand and her reacting, is in the pantheon of iconic movie moments. And this is, I think the thing about Pretty Woman is you watch it 30 some odd years later, you still see why it hit and why it worked, which is similar to how we were talking about Gigi. That Gigi was such a sensation. Even if you would say, oh, some stuff doesn't hold up or this and that, you can go, I can absolutely see why people flooded their multiplexes to see this. I think Pretty Woman is a piece of the cultural lexicon now. So much so that when you hear the Roy Orbison song, you think of the movie. It establishes Julia Roberts as the ultimate sweetheart movie star. It's one of the most, if not the most, iconic Richard Gere performance. Even in its day, it gets it gets Julia Roberts a Best Actress nomination for a comedy role. When does that happen? And not only all of that, it also features Ralph Bellamy. We have to like any movie that has Ralph Bellamy in it. That's one of me and Tom's guys. We got to support Ralph Bellamy. Am I wrong, Tom?
Movie's garbage, but okay.
Okay. But my point being, like, it is an iconic piece of the cultural canon. It is in there with, a Grease or an Annie Hall or an It Happened One Night, where it's just a landmark of, the romantic comedy genre and the pop culture film. So I think, in terms of just preserving films that are culturally important, I think Pretty Woman absolutely should be in the National Film Registry.
So like Mike said, that there were many avenues one could take for this movie, and the picks that we would link to it. Avenue I took was, as I was watching this movie and looking at the lush visuals and the setting and the gorgeous costumes and all that, I just started thinking, what if this became a horror movie? What if halfway through this movie about class and how the rich just treat the poor like whores, what if it became a horror movie? Now, I can't put in Audition, because that's a Japanese movie, but I do think there is a movie that deals with class that is, as in its lower budget way, as visually resplendent as this movie, and is dealing with similar themes of class, but being that it's a horror movie in a much different direction. It is from a filmmaker who I think should be absolutely represented, as he is one of the most important figures in cinema history, one of the most underrated actors in cinema history, someone who I think inspires a litany of performers today. My pick is The Mask of the Red Death, the Roger Corman, Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe, just horror jamboree, colors and like you've never seen them before, crazy costumes, depraved violence. It is one of the best horror movies of the 60s. It is fun, it is dark, it is disturbing, it is hilarious. It is maybe the pinnacle of what Corman and Price were doing together. I think this is kind of one of those landmark movies, like if you talked to guys like Guillermo del Toro or an Edgar Wright or a Bill Hader, who's famously played Vincent Price on SNL many times, flawless Vincent Price impersonation, they would say this movie was a big inspiration to them. And Roger Corman, the way Gigi influenced a lot of things after it. Roger Corman, I mean, maybe the most influential producer of all time. The amount of filmmakers that came out of the Corman School, and Vincent Price, may God rest that man's soul. I wish he lasted as long as Christopher Lee did. I mean, to the very end, he was just an absolute delight, showing up in Edward Scissorhands for that final screen appearance. In just a perfect farewell. Who birthed Tim Burton's most famous creation? Of course it was Vincent Price. So I think this is a movie that, for many reasons, should be in the registry, and in my demented mind, I see the connections between it and Gigi. So, The Mask of the Red Death is my pick for this episode.
Let's all go to the lobby.
Thank you again to Kyle Reid Hass and Jeremy Swanton for joining us. Next week, we're joined by A.J. McKeon as we head back to the Wild West for the 1946 John Ford film, My Darling Clementine. Don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Here on You're Missing Out.
They honor movies of historical, cultural, or aesthetic importance on the National Film Registry.